So recording has begun by stating you agree to SIETAR France recording this meeting. Thank you all for being here. A big thanks to Cecilia and later Karan that are going to come, and he's going to be our witness. We are here for When East Meets West, Understanding and Engaging Asian Learners. Please, we're asking that you mute your microphones and that you hold your questions until the question and answer period at the end. However, I will be here behind the scenes and monitoring anything in the chat box. So if you have an important question, if there are technical issues, please let us know and we'll be following. Last reminder, on Thursday evening this week, Gracias is going to give us the honor of continuing her apéro with us on techniques for using literature in intercultural training. I am now going to pass the floor to Grazia, who will present Cecilia, who will then take over for our conference for today. Thanks to everyone once again.
Okay, so hello, let me introduce you to Cecilia Louis. So Cecilia is a communication, cross-cultural and personal development specialist currently based in Hong Kong with a global network with projects in the Asia Pacific, North America and Europe. She relocated in Hong Kong 19 years ago to reconnect with her roots. Little did she know then that her understanding her own culture over time would turn into a critical part of her work, which often involves the intersectionality of people, culture, and communication. Outside of her corporate work, Cecilia also enjoys supporting professionals on a range of developmental initiatives that relate to discovering and strengthening their natural communication and leadership voice. Cecilia has presented her cross-cultural work at several SIETAR and other international conferences. This is her second webinar she has done for SIETAR Network, with her last one in April on China and India as a collaboration with a colleague from France, Mitun Mirda, whom you know. Please, Cecilia, Louis, I will let you speak now about your very interesting topic.
Thank you, Grazia and Linda. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I see a couple of familiar faces in the room. So my name is Cecilia, and I'm part of the SIETAR family. So, you know, because of COVID, I'm not able to be in France with Grazia. You know, this was scheduled to be today, in person, but because of COVID, I offered Grazia, you know, let's do something virtual and not, you know, and do it anyway, because, you know, everybody's just jumping online and delivering. So I'm happy to be able to join everybody tonight. And later on, because this webinar is designed for first, Montpellier Business School, and then SIETAR France in collaboration. So it's specifically customized for many of you who are educators, interculturalists, consultants, or anybody who have the opportunity to work with Asian learners, whether your Asian learners is a university student or a corporate trainer, or you know, coaching an Asian client. So a little bit about my background. You know, as much as I hate to admit, I've worked for at least 35 years, both in Canada and Asia Pacific, primarily Hong Kong, across corporate administration, communication, business development, and learning and development. So yeah, without too much into my background, let's start. The agenda, I'm gonna start a poll shortly, wanting to know where everybody is dialing in from, and also your role, just so I usually, if I'm, you know, on the ground, I ask everybody anyway, so that I know who's in the room, so that I'd be able to kind of, if you have challenges or whatsoever, I would like to put that into the content. We still have people coming in, so that's great. So anyway, as we know, tonight it's going to be very brief. It's about an hour, and then just before 2 o'clock, I'm going to bring on my guest, a student who's Indian by ethnicity, who's a final year student at the Hong Kong University, because Grazia shared with me some of the challenges that educators and administrators have, either at the school or at other university. So with that in mind, I kind of, make sure that some of the content is relevant for whoever's in the room. So I invited Corinne, who's coming on later, to share as a first person experience as an Indian university student, and also his experience from his journey for the last 4 years in Hong Kong with his peers. So Corinne will join us, in less than an hour. We'll go into some of the Chinese cultural values. I think many of you, if you're in intercultural work or you are familiar working with international students, you might already be aware of some of the Chinese cultural values. But I want to select those that are specifically how would these cultural values play into the learning environment and whatever learning environment that you're in. And then we'll look at some of the other ones that I personally think, has a pivotal role in, as an educator, understanding how to manage those cultural values in the classroom or in the training room. And then, that's the brief agenda. So first off, and this is the timeline, we're gonna finish off at 2:30, so I think we have plenty of time to go through the presentation. First off, I just, I'd like to know who's in the room. Like, where are you culturally, where are you dialing in from? And Linda's going to launch the poll so that everybody can dial in. I also recognize somebody calling in from Asia, so that's why I put Asia in the poll. So let's see. Great. So primarily Europeans, as I suspected, and with most of you from France, because this was designed, for many of you based in France. So great. So I have an idea. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. The second one, I'd like to know the day role that you have, or if you have an additional role, just to give me a sense of who's in the room. Oops. Linda, sorry, I closed out my screen. Maybe I'll do this again.
Yeah, sorry, Cecilia, did you close your screen? You stopped the sharing.
It's okay, it's okay. I'll relaunch, no worries.
The poll is up for everyone, right? Well, people are answering. Do you see it, Cecilia?
No, I don't. I apologize. I think I did something. Or maybe you can read off the answer for me, and that's fine too.
Sure. I'm going to close it because I think we have, yes, everyone's answered. Sorry. And share the results.
Yes, I can see it now. Thank you.
Yeah, okay,
Thanks, Linda.
You got it?
Yes. Okay, so we have half of the participants in the room who are educators, and then we have 25% as university administrator. About 1/3 of the people in the room are consultants, and then the rest are corporate trainer or coach, and then there's one person who is others, but that's fine. I have an idea. So as I mentioned, this webinar was originally designed first with the educator and administrators in mind. But then later on, I was informed that there are also consultants and trainers. So this is actually applicable for anybody who is in a learning environment. And that's why I put Asian learners rather than Asian students. Okay, great, we can move on. Thank you. Do I have to stop again, stop share before I can advance the PowerPoint? Apologies, everybody. Okay. So we're gonna get into some of the Chinese cultural values, and if this is familiar knowledge for you, apologies, but you know, we need that in the background. Today we're gonna focus on a learning environment, whether that's education for you specifically, or it's in the training room or elsewhere. Education to many of the Chinese, whether they're from China or other parts of the Asia, is you know, if you can see, education allows you to have a lot more opportunities, and opportunities kind of, you know, allows you to have a salary. So salary means freedom. You know, universally, that's, you know, the more education you have, the more opportunities you're able to bring to your future. You know, I'm not stepped inside a European institution, but I think everywhere you kind of go now, this is a typical learning environment. It's quite multicultural, and you know, this is a Canadian learning environment. On the left, it's a university. So look at how multicultural it is. And on the right, it was a public workshop that I did in the new year. But look at the diversity in the room as well. You know, these are obviously adult learners, but there's no difference. They're you know, equally, it's multicultural, and our world, whether it's business or education, it's increasingly multicultural. And in our classroom in Asia, whether it's like, we have 8 to 10 universities in Hong Kong, and typically any university you walk into or colleges you walk into, like, this is what you see. Some universities, they have more of a mainland Chinese demographics. About a year ago, I was teaching at a university for its Masters of Communications program, and I think 95% of the students are, they were from the mainland, and there was very little, like less than a handful of students from Hong Kong. And also, a lot of them just progressed straight through to a master's program rather than work a few years before they took up higher education. So my experience in the education, or as a trainer or coach, even as a mentor, you know, I've lectured a couple times. So the first time was it was a continuing education environment. So they were adults, Asian adults. The second time, as I just shared, it was a master's program in communications, and it was primarily mainland with a small percentage of local students from Hong Kong. You know, my other jobs, my other roles in my career, you know, a corporate trainer, but primarily when I go into corporates, you know, the national workforce is Asian. So, you know, it could be local Asians, it could be mainland Asians, it could be westernized Asians or foreign-born Asians. But many of the time in my past, they've been Asians. And as a consultant, I've also dealt with a lot of you know, Asian HR or Asian managers. And I've been a mentor for over 20 years to university programs, whether they're in formal program or formal structured university program. And I've also been an administrator in Canada within a university and college, and there were academic and non-academic, and as well foreign graduate students. So Chinese cultural values, I think it's a lot, there may be other ones, but today I'm gonna focus on those that actually play out in the classroom or the learning environment. And I think many of you are familiar with the phase, with the hierarchy and guanxi, but the other ones are equally important. And throughout the presentation, we're gonna, illustrate how they, how they are demonstrated by some of the students. And feel free, if you have a question, take note or type it into the Q&A, and we'll handle those towards the end. Now, to the Chinese culture, I think if you sign up for a lot of these webinars, you might be familiar. Every culture or every individual defines success very differently. But by and large, the Chinese culture, what's important to us, family is important to us, education is important to us, our social network is important, who we know, and our dining, whether you're able to take your clients out, those things are all part of, the definition behind success. Now, and of course, the socioeconomic material possessions that you're able to have. Sorry. And what does the Chinese culture in general look up to? Very successful business entrepreneurs. Like, I think many of us knows Jack Ma, who he is. And as a whole, I think the mainland culture is very patriotic. So their leaders, and a certificate, awards, diploma, all that is part of the you can call it, should we call how we define our own successes, where we went to school or where our kids went to school. Those are all important part of the Chinese culture, that if you if you have friends or people from the Chinese culture, and sometimes they'll proudly share with you, the institutions their children are attending or where they have been. So, and again, I need to remove this. Yeah. I mentioned a few minutes ago in my webinar in April, where I did business, the cultural values that play into the business transactions, hierarchy, phase, and relationship were important, no doubt. I think, I can't speak for other cultures, but in the Chinese culture, in the Japanese culture, many of the cultural values and the customs, they do play into the business, business transaction and business decisions, so it's important to understand the basic and understand the ones that are important in how people make their decisions. Now, looking at this, I'm going to switch, and I personally think there's a slight modification in what cultural values are important to students in the classroom. Now, let's look at what some of those might be in the learning environment. The face, it's still there. I think the family and the honor, like if you for a second visualize yourself as whether you're 18-year-old students or you're 30-year-old student, your family or your country sends you abroad to get an education. At the end of 4 years or 10 years, however long you're going to take, what is one thing that you can't wait to go home with is your highest achievements while you were abroad. So I think being able to share your achievements when you go home or during your stay overseas, that is something that you would be proud proudly to share with your friends back home, with your families back home. And another thing, I think many, if you're an educator, you will notice how loyalty and guanxi play out in amongst the students as they um, join together in group projects, or um, how they hang around together as a group. You know, if you go back to your learning environment, or if you're a trainer in your you know, you go into corporate and you start training, you will notice how people prefer to gather as a group. You know, because we you know, we all know how Chinese culture, we are a collective culture. We like to seek consensus within a group. So you will see those play out in the classroom as well. And faith, you know, as a culture, we're big. Whether, you know, I think there's a lot of value in us giving face to other people, not just within our culture, but also other culture. The losing part is where we need to be mindful, you know, shine a light. You know, I don't want to say educate, but to share with all the foreigners what not to do, because this is how you can cause someone to lose face. At the April webinar, you know, some participants didn't quite understand what phase is. So if I may equate that to ego or pride, like equally as you know, someone, I grew up in the West, so for a long time after I moved back to Asia, I have had to learn to reconnect with my own culture and learn to shift from a Western mindset to more of an Asian mindset. And now I'm able to toggle between both. So for, you know, for me to step into a classroom or into a multicultural training environment, that is very helpful to be able to think from either mindset. Hierarchy, like I decided that I would illustrate some of the cultural values on a continuum. Hierarchy, we measure those, you know, short or long term. So again, allow me to use a classroom as an example. If you are, I know there are some of you who are lecturers or professors within the university. So allow me to use that as a illustration. So if you're the professor, if you have Asian students, and even for myself, even the adult learners in a continuous learning environment, they would address me with, you know, Miss, rather than calling me by my first name. And that's just typical within an institution, because they view you as somebody who's an authority figure. Authority figures are like, you know, you're a physician, an educator, or a politician. Those are, you know, considered authority figures. Senior ranks, it could be your boss, it could be, you know, somebody, your grandparents. Those are, you know, the senior rankings. And elderlies, you know, as a Chinese culture, family and our ancestors and grandparents, they're all very important to us. So you typically see a Chinese family or an Asian family, they gather, or some of them, the Indian culture, like when Karen comes on to join us, if you have a question, there is a big overlap between the Chinese and the Indian culture. We both of our cultures share a lot of similarity. The bit about elderlies, you can, you know, you can find many families actually 2 to 3 generations under the same roof, and that's very common. The distance part within, you know, in the Western environment, sorry for the siren, I mean, everybody's learning or delivering work from home. So, that is to be expected, the external noise. Um, the if you're again, if you're a lecturer or a professor, a typical Asian Chinese student is not going to come up to you and put their arms on your back, on your shoulder. But within a Western family or Western learning environment, a Western students, the space between you and them is likely to be a lot closer. I think many of you, I mean, unfortunately, we're doing this as a webinar. Otherwise, we're going to be a lot more interactive, where I can see many of you, whether you're nodding your head or you don't agree. That way, I can understand whether or not I'm saying things that are right or wrong, or generalizing here. Now, if you look, and I'm also going to use Canada and US as a comparison. Many of us know that the Canadian or the Americans culture is very flat. If you have an American organization for a team, it's likely to be very flat um, organizational structure. Whereas in the Chinese culture or the Japanese or the Korean, it's very hierarchical. Now, because I know that many of you will be dialing in from France, so I'm actually also has France here on the continuum. Okay, and looking at Japanese, they're even more hierarchical than we are. This one is also a very popular or an easy one to understand. Many Western cultures they're very individualistic, meaning my decision is fine. I can take my decision. I don't have to ask anybody if it's okay. My idea, it's good enough. I'm gonna extend it out there, and it will be good. So usually, that comes from the self-focus and the other focus, the collectivism, cultural values. Whereas whether it's in a company or in the classroom, you often see students or adult learners, they come together as a group because it's just how they were raised. They like to discuss their problems or exchange ideas as a group. And if you, again, look at that continuum, France is right in the middle, with Hong Kong less so than China, but a lot more than the Indian and the Japanese culture. I think correlating with the individual and the collective, the task and the people-oriented, again, this one, after moving back to Asia, I have had to really adapt myself from becoming a goal-oriented person to more of a people-oriented person. But every now and again, like when I'm under the gun, I'm stretched for time. Like I have to be very mindful not to be too focused on the task and overlooking how people feel, or overlooking, especially during COVID, people first before tasks. And we've been repeatedly reminded to look out for people. And I think I think there's no one rule fits all. So you as a leader or as an educator, you manage the room, the whole learning environment is at your fingertips to manage. So you understand who's in the room, understand your learners, and understand their personality and whatnot, and you manage it accordingly. And again, I'm using the U.S. and Germany as one end of the continuum. And then if you look at India and China, and where Japan and France all sits on the continuum. if I may go over this phase aspect again, you know, again, I don't know who's in the room as far as how much knowledge you understand about the phase thing. In general, though, now I've listed off some examples. I think because I grew up in the West, I still think direct feedback, when something isn't working right, I voice my opinion right then and there is helpful. But then again, you be the judge, depending who's in the room, depending on the ranks is in the room. You know, this is my 19th year in Hong Kong, having moved back from a Western society. So I've had to adapt myself, whether it's communication or my approach. Through that adaptation, I have learned to read the people in the room, who they are, the situation, how much stake is in that room. I've learned to, I've just learned, you know, using myself as a thermometer. When I walk into a room, I can sense the tension. I can sense who's in the room by people's nonverbal, or, you know, a lot of time it's a nonverbal, you know, communication cues, facial expression. You know, if in doubt, you know, my suggestion is always listen more than you say, and that would be the safest thing. Now, when I initially discussed about this session with the organizer, when they shared with me some of the challenges of the educators at the business school or elsewhere, some of these are actually, I'm putting it back into the content, you know, Asian students or Chinese students to be specific. They avoid confrontations and they don't ask questions. And from a Westerner, you think that, well, if you don't ask questions, that means you fully understand what I'm asking you to do. But then only down the road, as the project, as a task progress, then you realize they're completely off the chart with how they understood your initial directions or instructions. So, you know, in April, when I did the webinar for business professionals, I made some suggestions in don't take those silence or the yes at face value. Learn to ask questions so that you get some confirmation on people's silence, on people's yes, or on people's no. One of the things that the organizer mentioned, that, you know, as an administrator, sometimes we deal with the students and, you know, they say yes to everything that we're sharing with them, but in the end we realize their yes didn't mean yes, but it meant a whole different thing. So later on, we're gonna, you know, I put in a slide in there specifically for that, and how as an educator or trainer, how you can confirm your understanding, whether or not that's a 100% yes, or it's actually a 95% no. So these are just some of the examples that I put up here, where you can actually avoid causing someone to lose face, or you're actually helping someone, giving them face. Like in general, if you consider praise, a recommendation, praise, you know, if a student did something well, praise them. You can by all means praise them in front of other people, because that's a face giving, right? Anything that's positive, it's a face giving. Anything that's a negative, like I know in some cultures, especially Western cultures, you know, feedback is good. Without feedback, there's no improvement. Well, I think within an Asian environment, or within certain personalities, you know, the more introverted personality, they're also they don't appreciate being pointed out in front of a group. So if you're gonna offer feedback, do that behind closed doors, do it in privacy. And that would be my personal experience. I personally have actually, caused awkwardness to other people, or at the receiving end, where people, like in general, I'm okay with feedback, because without feedback, I don't know where things stand with whether or not I need to improve or do better. Like, I'm okay with that, but I'm not okay when someone intentionally try to be disrespectful, or try to put you down so that they look good. I mean, those types of feedback I do not condone. So feel free at any time to take a snapshot with your phone. Now at the bottom, in April, when I did the webinar on FACE, I basically outlined, understand the person you're trying to interact with, understand what their cultural and personal values are. When you respect what someone values, then that's a positive. When you don't, when you're just being disrespectful, that's obviously going to destroy trust. I mean, that's if I can just generalize those two elements, how you build trust and how you damage trust. Now, I've added a few things here. I'm big on personality, more so than understanding someone's cultural conditioning or someone's cultural background. This stems from my personal journey in understanding myself, how much of it plays into the personality, and the biggest one is introversion and extroversion. Like I used to be very an extreme introvert. So as I age, I understand what that whole space of introversion. It's easy for me to spot an introvert in the room. It's easy for me to engage an introvert, and that's because I am one, and I was more of an extreme introvert in the past. So I totally know how to communicate with one, engage with one. Now, if you're an extrovert, you may want to spend a little bit of time in understanding how an introvert is wired, so that you can find ways to connect with them much better. Okay, I think more than anything, I feel that, like, cultural knowledge, cultural values, it's good to understand the basics. But if you try to read too much into it, sometimes you fall into the danger of stereotyping. But there's no danger in trying to understand someone at a personal level, trying to understand them, their personality, that their silence is just their personality, and it doesn't mean that they're mad, or it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. Okay. Communication, we all know that there's, the high context and the low context, and certain cultures are just very direct. I'm very direct in my communication. Because first of all, I don't know how to dance around. A is A, B is B. But I've learned to find ways to package my directness, so that there's a softened approach to it, rather than being blunt or being too direct about it. So whichever side you are on, understand that when someone is not direct, it could be cultural and it could be personality. I would say this is more cultural than personality, but I could be totally off the mark. Again, if you're an interculturalist, you understand, the difference between the high and the low. And Chinese culture, definitely, it's a high context, as are the Indian culture, or the Japanese culture, Korean culture, and some of the different like South Americas or the Arabs, those are high context, and the low ones, typically the Western cultures. But you know, it's, again, really depends. I don't want to generalize here. And the high context, even myself, you know, as a Chinese, I don't understand sometimes the high context types of communication that's used in my own culture. And again, I learn about my own culture every day of my last 18, 19 years. And the more I understand it, the more I apply it back into my work, and the more I understand my own family. You know, I'm not going to, because I think many people in the room are from the Western culture. So I'm going to just use, like, if you are interacting with those from the high context cultures, what can you do? Like, these are just some suggestions. And understand relationship comes ahead. So whatever you do, try and soften your approach, because they use a lot of nonverbal cues. So the, you know, sharpening your listening skills, or you know, learn how to read somebody. Those are all invaluable skills to have. And invite your more quiet students or learners to elaborate on their ideas, and invite them to participate. And again, later on, I'll have a slide. You know, don't assume that their yes is yes. By learning how to ask skillfully, you know, with your questions, rather than using close-end questions, you know, where they can only respond with a yes or no. That's sometimes it's not helpful at all. Learn to use open-end questions, so that you know, because as an introvert, sometimes we want people to keep asking until we're comfortable in sharing. So when I engage with an introvert, or you know, an introvert Chinese, that's what I would do. Like in the classroom, I learned to share more of myself, and then engage the more talkative or the more extrovert students in the room, so that as a way to warm things up, and sooner or later the quiet ones will join in. Whether, you know, in the past, whether I was a lecturer or a trainer or a coach, I find the key thing to be mindful of is how you engage your audience, whoever they might be, you know, whether they're 18 as a student or they're 50 as an adult learner. How you engage. Like in April, my webinar was titled Building Trust and Engagement Across Cultures, specifically with China and India. And we, within a business environment, I think, you know, every situation is different. Sometimes you need trust first, sometimes you need engagement first, but within the business environment, we felt that trust comes before engagement. But I'm going to switch it around in a learning environment. How you engage with your learners is important. It's the most important. You know, how you invite them to participate, how you praise them, how you group them up for projects. I think that's all part of engagement. I think as a culture, we, you know, the Chinese, whether it's Hong Kong Chinese or mainland Chinese, rewards is important, marks is important, incentives is important. The more extrinsic values, you know, it's important for the Chinese culture. So, you know, many of us we also run into the challenge of generational connection. Another challenge was, and that's precisely why I've invited Karen to come to share with us, both from a generational and a cultural standpoint. Because I know there are some educators in the room, they may have the you know, Indian students, in their classrooms, and they were having difficulty in understanding or in, connecting with the Indian students. So I think for Chinese younger generation, if you think about the grades, the praise, and also technology, right? I mean, nobody's without a phone. Nobody doesn't know how to do the mobile gamings and all of that. So if you try to find common topics to engage with the younger generation, those might be the common topics. And if you have adult learners, they may prefer the personal approach, the one-on-one, engaging conversations. Communication preference is something that we also need to be mindful of. The younger generation tends to be, very tech and very mobile oriented. But if you have adult learners, then you may need to pay attention to what their preferences are, whether it's they prefer the one-on-one or the group. Even within the Chinese culture, they might be group oriented. But as an introvert myself, I can do both, but I love my solitude, so I'm equally fine to do the one-on-one. To build relationship, I'm much rather, and I do it much better, the one-on-one approach. I know there might be 2 or 3 of you attended my webinar back in April, and I've cut and paste some of these suggestions, and this is for learners of all ages who are Asians. I get the common comment from people, their Asians are so quiet, they're so reserved, and they don't talk, and you ask them 10 questions and they may just nod or smile, or I think as a culture, because the education system hasn't changed that much here in Hong Kong or in China, in the sense that as a culture we've conditioned or we've been raised to respect the elderly, respect authority figures, don't talk back, be seen and not be heard in the family. And this kind of gets older. It plays like it's actually it's disadvantage to us in the workplace, because and I see a lot of adults now who need to upgrade their skills to be more self-expressive, to be more engaging, learn to, because if you don't express yourself, if you don't express your needs, your boss or your colleagues don't know what you're thinking about. If you want that promotion, you're going to have to, be a bit more visible, either at meetings or, in a company in general. So you need to learn how to express your ideas, express your opinions, so that other people understand, your intellect, understand your dissatisfaction. So I think, the system itself has not been conducive for, for these Asian students or adult learners. Now, as an educator or as a trainer or a manager, whatever role that you have, I think we can do our part in making these quiet, reserved individuals come out of their shell by inviting them, by engaging them. I think going back to personality, I think it's always a plus, learning how to read people, learning how to, learning how to connect with your audience at a more individual level. if I may just talk to Gracia for a second here. Karen is trying to log up, but he's not able to. So I don't know what's happening. So I'm monitoring my messages here, trying from his phone as well. So maybe keep an eye out for him in the waiting room.
Okay.
So these are ideas I shared in my last webinar, and I'm bringing it back. So regardless of what your role is, whether you're an educator or a trainer, like these are some of the suggestions that I have used, and they prove uh, they prove to work. So it's much easier for me. Perhaps as an introvert, as a Chinese myself, I've not encountered much problem with my own kind. And again, these are what I've tried, and I like to share them with you. And again, these are just what I've tried in trial and error to rework. By all means, I'm not going to go into each of them, but take a snapshot. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly, because we only have 15 minutes towards the end for Q&A for both myself and Karen. So if your questions doesn't get asked, I will, and if I know who you are, I will reach out to you directly to understand your situation more, so that I can help you out. Again, relationships is important. So try to, at all costs, relate with your students on a one-on-one, try to understand their situation, understand us as an individual rather than a homogeneous group. Grazia or Linda?
Yes.
Are you online?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am. I think probably your student had the wrong link. Maybe we had a connection problem, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe resend the link to me so I can forward. Sorry for the interruption. Yeah.
Yes.
I also have some educators who said, their quietness, their reservedness, is it because they're not happy? I think as a culture, we just don't show our emotions very expressively. Like if, I myself, like I know that to be the case. Like even if I win a lottery, you're not going to see me jump up and down. And I think that's just who I am. That's my personality. And again, I think it's part of the cultural conditioning. We're just more contained. And if we look at the continuum on the left side, this time we're reversing. We're more contained. And the Indian culture, I know Karan, I know him, and he's more expressive, more so than me. But then again, it really depends. Like if I'm, in a room with Karan, then I'm a little bit different than if I'm in the public with, a whole classroom of people. Yes, Karan's joining us, and he'll be in the background until I'm done here. So yes. Next one. Thank you, Grazia. So this is the yes. Are the yes? Why are they? It came from the organizer here. As an administrator, why are we getting a lot of the contradiction? Why are they saying yes while they mean no? I think if you look at the cultural value, one of them is harmony, other oriented. So as a person, if you know that to be your case as a child, and you know that you're expected to respond in a certain way, like as I read this, I couldn't help but to uh, frame it within a family between a child and a parent, because I see that a lot as well. How children, whether you're a 6-year-old or a 20-year-old, as a child, you are expected not to have too strong of a negative response to what you've been told to do. And I think if you were a child growing up, you see how your parents respond, how the type of expectations that they have, the type of emotions. And as a culture, even in Hong Kong, it's a very people pleasing, other oriented culture. The Many of them, they care more about how they're being perceived, how other view them, more so than how they see themselves. As someone who grew up in the West, um, doing what pleases you, make a decision that's right for you. That's what they uh, what they teach us in the school, in the society. It's in the system. So a decision that I make for myself, as long as I know that it's the right one for me, then it doesn't matter what other people think. So there is that difference. Um, if if you're a trainer in with Asian learners, then you'll understand this, why someone, this also plays out in the consensus, the group dynamics. If there are 10 people in the group, 9 of them say yes, that last person is likely going to say yes as well, because they don't want to stand out in the crowd. They don't want to be the one, like a sore thumb, or they just don't want to be the last person who is objecting that general consensus. So my suggestion here is just to get better at asking skillful questions, some of the open-end questions, so that you get some confirmation around whether this yes is a no or this yes is a 100% yes. So the thing is, don't take those yes and no's at face value. Get good at asking questions. I had this question came from the organizer. How can we handle plagiarism? Now, I understand because this problem is in Western education system. I hear it, I read about it. Mainland students or Chinese students, they copy work, they cut and paste information from the internet, and turn it in as an assignment. But plagiarism, I'm sure in Europe it's a big deal. In North American institutions, it's also a big deal, because you can be expelled from the university. Now, as the organizer shared this with me, as I was planning this content, I had to go back to the cultural values. Now, I mentioned earlier, as a foreign student, you're there, whether the country sent you or you're learning on the hard-earned dollars of your parents. Someday, you want to go home and be proud of your achievement. Be proud that you can share with your families and friends that I got my degree, I got my whatever. Okay. Now, I don't know if it'll work, because it's never happened in my situation. I've never had any students cheated in their work. But if you're an educator who has dealt with this problem, because Western society is very big deal on it's very heavy on policy and ethics, but to just tell your student, this is a policy, this is the, what we go by. Sometimes, whether it's, we don't know how much they understand, whether it's a language problem or, whatever problem it is. They may not understand. But if you put it in simpler terms, if they get, now I don't know, across Europe what the punishment is, for plagiarizing. But if getting kicked out of university or dispelled from school, it's the ultimate, for ultimate punishment for plagiarism. This is how I would. This is how I would elaborate or explain it to the students. This is what's going to happen if you're caught cheating. You get sent back to home without your certificate, without your degree. Is this what you want to tell your family? I don't know. Like, I mean, I thought I would use that to help people understand, okay, link it with the value of family, honor, and faith. Do you want to go home and be shamed because I cheated? In in the Western world, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. We understand what that means. In the Chinese, in Chinese, we also have that. What we understand doesn't mean we all play by the rule, play by the game, right? So if that helps you to link it to the value, give it a try. I don't know if it'll work or not, but this is how I would make the connection. If that is your challenge. I remember growing up here, I've seen people cheat. I don't know, I cannot explain to you why, but we don't want to see that happening too often. And as a university student, I think if you let that happen, then they're gonna think that it's fine to take it into the workplace. So try it. If anybody, let me know if it works. Half of the people in the audience comes from a French cultural background. If I may just point a couple of things out, again, I don't want to generalize, but I know that to be the case in the French culture is, I often hear, because I have friends from the French, from France and from the culture, confrontational is a common characteristic of the French culture. So if you look at the continuum, look at how you're not at the one end. Russia is even more extreme, but you're already at one end of the continuum. And look at who's on the other end. It's known that the Japanese and the Chinese, they avoid conflicts. They don't like confrontation. Harmony is a big cultural value. We like peace. But that doesn't mean everybody in the culture is the same. I've seen people who are very confrontational in my own culture, but I bet they, like myself, 20 years ago, they probably were raised from the West. And look at the Indian culture and those from Hong Kong as well, right? I mean, if you come from a culture that you want win-loss and you want nothing but competitive, if you have a competitive culture, but understand who's in the room and understand who you're trying to influence, right? I mean, if you whether that's a student or whoever that's you're trying to build a relationship with, if their cultural values it's totally opposite with yours, then you need to come up with a solution as to how you need to navigate around it. I mean, you can't I'm not sure you can ask somebody who seeks harmony to start fighting with you, but you know, if you're the older, you're the more senior, understand you have that awareness, then maybe soften your approach a little bit, and maybe um, you know, there's a lot of positive in understanding how to have a debate, how to agree to disagree. So maybe you can find a middle ground, you know, with your learners or your students. But understand that, you know, how far apart both cultures are. And another one is risk taking. I notice on the continuum for French, for the French culture, you're very, very high risk. You know, you don't, but the Chinese culture and many in Hong Kong and in the Indian culture, it's the same. Um, they're not comfortable with uncertainty. You know, COVID um, either makes you stronger or, you know, send you the other way because there's so much uncertainty around the COVID situation, right? And that's why, as a culture, many people they don't see uh, mistakes and failure as a good thing. They're not comfortable with uncertainty or ambiguity. They want, you know, who likes um, you know, who likes unknown, but it's something that you can learn to be comfortable with. And I've been there, you know, coming from the Western culture, growing up in the Western culture, there's a lot that are within our control. But since coming back to Hong Kong, people are always late. You have to change your appointment 10 times before you can meet with somebody. So you get used to, you know, the unknown, and you get used to being flexible and adaptable over time. So if you have a student that you interact with all the time, but they are scared or they're not comfortable in taking that step, or just, you know, encouragement is always helpful, right? From you as an educator or a professor. But just understand where both cultures sit on the continuum. Now, understanding what the Chinese culture or the Indian culture is one thing, but also asking ourselves, what do we bring to the table? What might be conflicting? And that's why I brought out the conflict, the dispute, and also the risk taking. So as a person, as a culture, what are you bringing into the room that may conflict with that environment, with your Asian students or what have you? Just being mindful. And those could be generational differences or preference or just mindset, okay? Because each of us is different. Now, I put this up at the end of all my webinar and learning. Like, understanding cultural facts and knowledge is 1/3 of your equation in better understanding other people or build better relationship or trust or engagement. Um, the other 2/3 is skills. You know, get good at listening and asking questions. You know, learn to deliver feedback standing in front of you, whether they're you know, from the Chinese culture or from the French culture. Like when I'm with somebody whom I know they value feedback, I can just give it to them directly. But when there's somebody who's more sensitive, more quiet, or more senior, then I know how to dial myself or adapt myself to do differently. And attributes, like, I mean, if you have the skills and you have the knowledge, but without practicing some of the attributes, like understanding and being more, you know, empathetic towards other people, you know, you're still gonna come up against some issues. I'm running over time here, and I am going to bring Karen on, but I don't. Let me see where his slides are. There it is. Okay. Karen, are you in the room?
Yes, I am.
Hello, where are you? Hello, Karen. Say
Hi.
hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you today.
Yeah. Karen, and I met Karen in a volunteer environment. We um, we both belong to an LGBT mentoring program. I sit on the leadership team, and Karen represents the students. And it's a program where it serves all university students in Hong Kong, and we match each student with corporate professionals. So we've worked together since November, and I've invited him to other events as well. Um, Karen is currently, and who's also been stuck in India. He went home since Chinese New Year, and he's been stuck in India ever since. And he even has doubts whether or not he can return to Hong Kong. So at the request, and I understand that some of the challenges, today, some academia was experiencing some challenge with Indian students. So I invited Karan, first as an Indian student, and also has that experience in Hong Kong with his Chinese peers, to come here and share with everybody, um, you know, educate us all what Indian youths are like. And I'll hand it over to you, Karan.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide? Hi.
Next slide.
Yeah. So in general, I'd say no, not this slide, the previous one. Yeah. Thank you so much. In general, I'd say that I'm here to talk about the Indian values and culture with respect to an Indian student or somebody who's joining a company, like for example, an employee of yours who comes from India, right? So the Indian values basically entail a lot of respect for family and elders. And in general, we'd say I'm a lot more hospitable, and we focus on education as well as we have a tendency of humility and spirituality. So in general, basically, you can say that Indians may be a little humble, even though arrogant, whatever, may be different from person to person. But in general, they'd say that we have respect for elders and authority in our family and in our workplace and in education environment, right? So if you go to the next slide. Thank you. Um, so basically, when you say have an Indian learner who's traveling abroad for the first time, or you, for example, if it's a student of yours, or if you just hired somebody who's as an employee, I'd say they come from a generally affluent slash more educated background, as in they have more money. And for example, most students use agents to get their first international exposure. So basically, a lot of people don't really have that kind of exposure to the foreign cultures and environment. So that is one thing, one potential teacher or employer needs to be aware of. As you can see in the graph on the right side, basically you have majority of people coming from richer states in India, as Gujarat, Punjab, Kerala, Delhi, and Maharashtra, which have most of the money in the country, right? So that is the scenario in general. And if you go to the next slide. But then, regardless of what you see in terms of culture and in terms of background, I'd say that Indian learners are generally a lot more resilient. They're fast learners, competitive, and determined. As you might have noticed if you have come across anybody who has an Indian background or a South Asian background in general, I'd say that they tend to pick up things quite quickly, and they tend to get that straight A's or like impress you at the workplace, and they'll do that at whatever cost, right? So usually these are perfect traits, and one can expect from anybody, and that's why most of them succeed abroad in whatever they do. Yeah, I guess. If you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. However, you'd see that there's some sort of the other side as well. Like not everybody is able to cope with a new environment, or show that have that kind of resilience or determinants that or hardworking nature that is required to succeed at the workplace slash education environment. Some of them might actually be reserved, hesitant, or even irresolute, and this might be possibility to a lot of different environmental situations, such as, you know, like you, it is in general, I'd say that South Asian experience some sort of racism and disconnection in society, especially when they travel abroad. As I just mentioned before, that in our a couple of slides back, that you don't generally people do not have that kind of social or cultural exposure to foreign societies. When they come abroad, they feel out of the place and they feel like they do not belong, and they find it really hard to settle into a new community. So as a suggestion to a prospective colleague, employer, or educator, what you can do is basically try to make the environment hospitable and welcoming. If you notice somebody who is not really engaging with with the community, or having a little hard time to settle in, what you could do on your side is be empathetic and try to reach out to those newcomers and try to show some sort of support and try to make the environment more hospitable towards them. Because these newcomers are the ones who are most vulnerable to facing such racism or being thrown aback by all those all the ways the society treats them, or the new culture altogether, which might come as a huge culture shock to them. I guess that's all basically I had about the South Asian perspective. I think Cecilia mentioned a lot about in general student and in general an Asian learner, which I would say apply here as well. So I'd say that my points have been well complemented by hers, and I just really added very little to this presentation. But yeah, I hope this might help. These two suggestions, I'd say, are the more important suggestions that anyone can use in their life.
Feel free if Karen's content hasn't answered anybody's question. By all means, I'm actually going through the questions, by some of you throughout the webinar. So by all means, like if anybody has any questions specifically for Karen on Indian students, enter it into the chat box, or even unmute yourself and ask directly to Karen. That's fine as well, because we're a small group. I'm trying to digest some of the questions in the Q&A here. Thank you, Karen. I guess
Thank you.
Your brevity makes up for my long-windedness, so thank you. And so let's open the floor up to questions. And anybody, like I'm going through, I'm digesting, trying to understand some of these questions here. Dennis has quite a few, so I'm going to have to go through them. Karen, can you view the Q&A?
I can only see the group
Karen?
chat.
Yeah, that's it. It's on the chat.
I only have one chat on the group chat.
Yeah, if you want to go through and see if there's any specific for...
So Cecilia, I can't really see the past chat. I can only see the very most recent one.
Yeah, Cecilia.
Okay. Yes, who's calling?
It's Linda. It's Linda here.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi.
I've kept track and noted some of the questions. Would you like me to tell you and make it easier for you, maybe?
Oh, no, it's fine. It's much better for me to read them.
Okay.
I have Vincent. He said, I have a lot of Indian students everywhere I teach. So appreciate your content. Vincent, do you have anything specific for Karen that he has not addressed while I read the other ones?
No, well, thank you, Karen. I think what you portrayed was quite to the point. And as I said, I teach in many places, business schools, technical universities, whatever, and lots of Indian students, because obviously demographically you are everywhere, like the Chinese, very often in competition. And indeed, I recognize that. Also the importance of face for them as well, very important, of succeeding, of not knowing very often what they really think in Western standards, and then nodding of the head. There's a famous thing that they're not too sure what they mean. So
it's a very South Indian thing.
Where are you from?
I'm from North India.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So that's no. I mean, and often they have a technical background, and I think yeah, I just see that in front of me. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Vincent, you also make a remark about single child. I mean,
Yeah.
they are a culture of their own. I mean, I have one daughter, so I know what their characteristics. You have one child as well, so they have their specific characteristics. And yeah, the general. Do you have siblings, Karen?
I do. I
Karen?
have a younger brother.
Yeah. Um, what what from a generational standpoint, can you educate, everyone in the room, like what are they very different from your Chinese peers at the university?
Who is? Who's different?
Indian
Uh,
Indian youth compared to Chinese youth.
right. So I'd say that I have noticed in general, I mean, at least from my exposure in Hong Kong, is that we all tend to group together. And I think you might have noticed that, Vincent, as well, that Chinese would tend to group together with Chinese and Indians would try to stick with Indians and sector. Usually it's the Westerners who try to mingle with everybody. But no, I mean, in general, that's what I've noticed. Yeah, then I guess that is the trend. Other than that, I'd say we're all very studious and focused on what we want to achieve. But then when we don't have a lot of direction, some of us tend to lose control and then have no idea what to do.
You know what? I
That's the
guess
tendency.
even in my past experience, mainlands they group together, Hong Kong they group together, even in the workplace they're like that. Now I don't know if that has anything to do with language.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Or I mean, I think it's universal, right? Vincent,
Mhm.
if you go, you might be an exception because you like to meet with other people. But if you go abroad and you see somebody from your own culture, there's a tendency that you connect with that person a lot better. So I think I had my challenge. I think one question came as I was preparing the content was that we're trying to separate the students, not allow them. I've had students who kind of want to be in the same group all year round. We have different projects, but they want to gel with the same group. So I guess as the educator yourself, you set the rule how you want them to work in projects. You set the rule. Like don't let them naturally gravitate towards each other. I mean, but share why you're doing it though. Because I remember I did that once and I changed the marking system. I changed it to because it was a communication course. So I wanted the students to have more experiential exercise. And I told them, I said, this is what the real world looks like. And that's why I'm doing it. It's for your own good. I want you guys to be up here doing more presentation, doing more speaking, because that's what the workplace is like. So you might as well start practicing. I mean, it's uncomfortable for many of them, but they come around to it. Yeah. Dennis has a lot of questions. I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer him, in the next 5 minutes. Now, is there a Pascal? You have a question. Are there difference in treatment between boys and girls in higher education? Like, which one are you talking about? Which culture? Is it cultural specific?
Well, I heard that, for example, for business, it can be complicated for women, especially because to make business, you need to also do some personal activities like eating and drinking. And my question was about drinking alcohol. I asked my Chinese students and they say, yes, to do business, you need to drink alcohol. So this is something that is already one of my questions. And in higher education, is there, are boys and girls treated differently by teachers in the sense that in business, there might be a difference? That was my question. Compared to Western students. I was wondering if there was like a masculinity dimension that you could also find in the school, not just in business.
Are you asking within the context of Asia, or because I don't know in Europe, right? So I can only.
Oh, I'm in France and I teach a lot of Chinese students, mostly mainland Chinese students. And I was wondering if there was an aspect of differentiating boys and girls in the classroom in mainland China.
I cannot answer that question because
No, especially because I work in a business school, so it's another context than university. And in business,
can you share with me why you like to know that question? Because those students are now in France.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just wanted to that was just a reflection I had about equality, gender equality, because in France it's a topic that is more and more addressed. And it's something that I was wondering if in China it's a topic that is addressed as well, if there are more differences, you know, because in the workplace, in the business,
I think
do you find that there's a bit more equality because of this hierarchy thing that could also be gender related? Not just.
I think it's a global topic. Here in Hong Kong, you know, gender is a big topic, but you know, it really depends the context to the situation. I mean, if it's a local company, there may be. If it's a Western company, there may be. Like, it really depends. Like, it's too generalized of a question. I don't think I can give you an answer, yes or a no. It really depends. Yeah.
It was just a reflection I had on how this is dealt, because this is a big issue right now, especially in business schools, because there is a lot of problems of sexism. And so I was wondering if you had some experience about that in Hong Kong, in mainland China, etc., etc.
Karen, do you see any at Hong Kong View?
No, not particularly, but I would definitely say that business has been a very male dominant society, and even if you see like television/movies, you would notice that you have scenarios where it's like men going to drink and then doing business, and women are never a part of that. So I see that has been happening, and it's part of society, I guess, at this point. I'd say a problem because of the West, but that's none of my business.
I can probably respond a little bit on the drinking culture, because I did a training for a French company maybe a year or two ago, and somebody, now don't quote me. I'm trying to recollect. In back 20 years ago, I think drinking it's very much a business culture in China. I think nowadays, I can't remember. I think instead of the hard liquor, they're switching to wine, because the younger generation is more into wine. And it's not as critical as in the past. You know, I think growing up, I used to hear that a lot. You gotta be able, even for a female, you gotta be able to drink a lot to, to entertain business associates or what have you. But things have evolved. I think the younger generation, they're more into wine, and it's not as hardcore as it used to be. So.
Okay. Hi. Just one thing, we can continue on a few more minutes. This doesn't bother me, but I would really like to be able to take a screenshot of everyone with their cameras on who's attending. Do you think you could stop your screen share and then you can go on with There you go, perfect. And you can go on with discussing for a few more minutes, and I'll be able to show all our fans how nice it was today to be with everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Don't continue your discussion and talking about your questions. Huh?
Yeah.
Just felt like everybody's
I love to, connect with many of you. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Now I'm going to go back to the questions.
Celia, maybe I can just ask a couple of them that seem quite relevant to me. So one of them was about online settings. How do you build trust, or maintain trust, or develop trust, so that you can engage Chinese students in an online setting?
So I guess during COVID, everybody's online. We're online right now. How do you build trust? And I would say it's still the same question. How you engage with your audience. Let's say, we're a small group here today. If I'm able to see everybody on the screen, which only a fraction of you, I would probably invite somebody to share. You know your student. So hopefully you knew them before COVID, and you would continue to engage them online. Again, I find that personality, understanding people, understanding your audience, and if you want, I say between culture and personality, read into the personality. It's more valuable than the culture, because when when I met Karan, I connect with him as a person, not as an Indian human. So, that I've always find that very helpful. When I connect with Vincent, he's a person and not Dutch. So I don't, and you know what? But yet I've met people who are different. I've had people come up, oh, you must be from Shanghai. And I had to correct him. No, I'm not. So, those kind of assumptions nowadays, it's a little bit dangerous. It doesn't matter where you go, because the world is so global. They're like, a couple of dozens of people here today, but I bet everybody's story is different. I mean, I might be able to tell who's Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, but I cannot tell from one European to another. And the question that everybody's very comfortable being asked is, where are you from? In Asia, that is a totally safe question. Because people are very global here. So coming back to that online, virtual, I'd say as an educator, you have to get comfortable at talking, get comfortable in making small talks, asking people how they are. Karan, maybe you can share. I talk to you every now and again. Like, what are some of the things that helps you, I don't know, build trust towards me? I don't know.
I mean, I'm not the perfect person here because I am generally very trusting, I'd say. But in general, my advice would be that you have to show some sort of vulnerability towards the person you want to build trust with. Because in general, I'd say people who are looking for other people to connect with, have something to share, which they do not feel like they could share with anybody, right? And it usually puts them in a vulnerable position. So if you somehow show them that you can be empathetic, or you could be vulnerable towards them as well, and you won't just go around blabbering about what they said or they expect doing, etc., that it would be easier for them to trust you and then build that relationship with you.
Yeah, I mean, that goes without saying, virtual or live, and I think the final question I would want to plant in everybody's mind is, it's not just about understanding the students in the room or the learners in the room. It's, as an educator, as a trainer or a coach, how can we many of the students are newcomers to your environment. They're foreign students. So how can you make that environment more welcoming? Because I used to, you know, do cross-cultural training with a lot of expats, and usually their investment, their training investment goes to the more senior person. And I always say that you can't just train one person. It's like a couple who's getting, you know, um, you shouldn't just train one person on communication skills. It should be a teamwork. So how do you, whether you're an educator or the national workforce, you should also make that newcomer feel more welcoming by doing each of your part. So as an educator, what can you do to make your foreign student more welcoming in that learning environment? So, you know, be more empathetic, understand that they're in their transition, understand that, you know, they can always use some help in adjusting and adapting. So maybe partner them up with a local student, you know, as a buddy, and show them how to get around. I think there's a lot of things that we can't tell what's going on in the newcomers. You know, you can't read what's going on their face, but you can, you know, as Karen put it, you know, they're in a vulnerable situation because they are in transition. So what can you do to help that student? I know it's you know, sometimes you may say, well, it's not my job to do that, but I think if you want more harmony in your classroom, that's something that, you know, you can consider doing. Yeah.
Another thing, I guess, that what you can do is basically, I'd say that because as an educator, you can have more teaching assistants who are suppose master students, etc., who are there to help your fellow undergrad students or like junior students. Because in general, I'd say like people are more trusting towards their own generation rather than like old people, if you don't mind me saying. Because I'd say like you could be scared of that authority figure and how they might be judged. So they might be more willing and more open to sharing things with a teaching assistant rather than a professor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can I say something here?
Yeah,
Can
sure.
I start? Yeah, yeah. I think the whole thing you're mentioning it, the whole concept of the international classroom, in which we break down the national barriers and try to put people together. Anyways, this is what we're doing in most institutions, I think now at the moment in Europe, if not beyond, and try to develop this international classroom in which you put people together. They don't do that nationally, but you put them together. There's the role of the teacher to do that. And then in this respect, you will make sure that the Indians also collaborate with others and the Chinese with the locals, and the locals, especially the locals, are the biggest issue very often. They don't want to mingle with the others. So you have to break down those barriers. And I see some of you laughing because you recognize that. To make sure that the locals, as biggest obstacle, mingle with the international. So that's the biggest issue. So in this respect, when this works, you have this harmony, this diversity in the classroom, that you work towards inclusion, and that's that's a given, and that's a gift if it's possible. So just apply the international classroom concept, and that's fine. That's maybe another topic for another webinar. The whole international classroom.
Yeah. I have a question. I don't understand either. I don't know. Lily, I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Leligiois. You have a question for Karen. Yes. She has noticed that there are a lot of Indian students who seem to get along with their own with other nationality, but seem to have that internal conflict. Why is that? Is it competition, or
yes? Is it culture specific?
Yeah.
What happens is I mix students in my classes, and I've noticed that the Indian students are very careful to collaborate with other nationalities and not make a fuss, and really they work hard. But sometimes, since I do try to put at least 2 people of each nationality in the group so that they don't feel isolated or alone, sometimes it's the 2 Indian. Usually it's not 2 men. It's usually when I put two Indian girls together and they collaborate with two Asian girls and maybe a German and Italian. The Indian girls seem to always have a conflict that sometimes disrupts the group, because one is going to want the group to follow their ideas, and the other young woman is going to want the group to follow her ideas. And it often ends in my office in an argument. And it's happening so often, I'm looking for an answer. Please, Karen, is there something to be explained, or is it more of a gender issue than a cultural one? I don't know.
Oh. Well, I'm not sure about your exact teaching background, but in general, I'd say Indians are very competitive and very strong-minded. And it's because of the way we've been brought up that you have to score well, or you have to get that A+ so that you can get into the best colleges. And it's a very cutthroat environment, right? For example, I come from a technical background, and I'm not sure, but if you've heard, the best schools in India for technology are called IITs, or Indian Institute of Technology, right? There are schools with a admission rate of like 1 in every 100,000 students, 1 in 100,000. What the number of people who actually apply to get into those colleges, right? So you can imagine that if you have 1 million students applying and you have only 100 seats in one of those colleges and you have 10 of those colleges. So that kind of, I think, conflict, that's how I think the competitiveness comes in our culture, is you have to start prepping from very early on. And right, and then the same thing comes in terms of like the whole strong-headedness, and like I have to be right, and like you have to follow my ideas, and because I guess they all want to be leaders, but they all don't want to compromise.
Both girls want to be the group leader, and the group is usually willing to be led by the Indian students. But it surprised me that they didn't try to collaborate and lead the group together. I was surprised that they had such an individualistic approach.
That is the issue. So I just said that it's all about like me over everybody else in this society for some reason, and I'd say in the West it has been very collaborative from the very beginning, since high school or like middle school. But here we don't really have collaboration in our curriculum, unfortunately, until we end up in university.
Thank you so much. At least I have more of an idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I am going to have to come in now and say that we have gone over our time limit a healthy amount of time now. And so I think what I want to do is say thank you very much to everyone. Thank you especially to Grazia, who had brought Cecilia to us, to Cecilia for being willing to kind of give us a replacement for the day she was supposed to do, or half day she was supposed to do in person. Thank you to Karen for joining us too. So we got, somebody there who really knows what they're talking about because they're living it right now. And I want to just say thanks to everybody. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
I've saved the chat, and any questions I haven't had a chance to answer, I will reach out to you directly by LinkedIn, including Grazia. I just saw your question, so I will come back to you directly. Thank you for everybody's time, and during your lunch hour to stop in and listen to the webinar. And it's almost 9 o'clock for me, and Karen's 2.5 hours behind, so like 6:30 dinner time. So thank you, everyone. Hope to see you before long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.